those things and just try and keep it really simple to not start that fight. Either way, they're small things. They're expected on a secondhand property, and they're things that you don't necessarily need to do tomorrow to rent the property out or to enjoy that yourself. And you might just potter around and do those jobs over time. The bigger issues for us, the major ones. And we see a lot of, I'd say my ones are roof damage, rising damp, subsidence, restumping. Yeah, we had a really good issue recently with restumping that we can talk about in a minute. It's those types of big issues, water leaks and things like that, plumbing and drainage that's not great in the gardens. Anything else I've forgotten there that you think are kind of big ticket items that you really need to stall and research further?
I'd definitely say like beam work for decks. The balustrades that go through on those decks can be loose, and there's a big warning that comes in the building and pest reports, and it can scare a lot of people. What you just need to do is to dig further, and also not take into account a quote from the real estate agent. Go out and do that hard work.
Well, let's unpack that one as well, because I think that's a really good case study in terms of that one we recently just did in Bendigo that had that in terms of the restumping. The other one that I missed, that's an obvious one, is termites.
Oh, yes.
That's a common one that we come up with. And really with termites, you need to understand and you need to dig into it further. Are they active? Are they inactive? Is it outside the house? Is it near the house? Or is it in the house? There's so many questions that you've got to unpack. So we're just to finish off on that part of it anyway, in terms of the first part of this talk today. I think the key thing to leave people with today is you want to know if there's items that you're going to pick a fight with in the building and pest up front. You want to know the true cause of those issues, the true rectification costs. And then I think one that is overlooked a lot that is really important is the actual timeline to do the work.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Because we get people that say to us, well, I need to spend like $50,000 up front to do all these things. And we say, well, not really. Sure, it'll cost you X amount over time, but it's not something that you actually need to do today. So it might be that the fences are damaged, for example. Well, there might have been some old termite damage in a back fence. Well, it doesn't mean you need to replace the fence. The fence is still sitting there after 30 years or whatever it might be. It's up to you to choose whether you spend the money to replace that. So a lot of buyers will pick a fight and say, okay, well, it's got fence damage, for example, or whatever it might be. I want to take off the full cost of that rectification work from the purchase price. But it's just not realistic, is it? It's not.
No, not from my experience anyway. But there's another point that I would like to try and understand a little bit more, which is real estate agents, when we buy property, they often point out things to me. And initially I'm like, oh, fantastic. But then I always think, why would you point out the flaws in the property?
That's not you to second guess a real estate agent, is it?
Oh, always, every day. But yeah, being your level of experience, why?
Because it's a trust building exercise is why they do it. If you've got a small problem or a problem that you've got an answer for, and let's just jump into that case study, because I think that ties in nicely with the one that we're talking about in Bendigo that relates to this. So we were looking at buying this property for a client, which we purchased last week, and the agent up front said, look, it needs restumping. You can't see that in the photos, but it's slanting. It needs restumping. Everything can be fixed. I've had a quote. It's going to be 20 to 25 grand. Now, there's an element of trust building that goes on there, because he's highlighted a problem, been very open to communicate, and you feel like, okay, good. Well, he's starting on the right foot. I trust him, and you might, get into a conversation further. But often an agent will do that because there's other things that they haven't spoken to you about. And as it turned out, we did a building and pest inspection on that property, and we talked about it on our last Facebook Live. And we talked about how we renegotiated the contract a month later to save the money to cover the cost of all the renovation works, because it turns out that the restumping quote was $30,000 to $35,000, and the total cost of the works to rectify all the problems because of the restumping is probably more like 50 grand. So we had to go back, and renegotiate that $50,000. So he was very clear and, well communicated around that issue. But even still, it was on the light side of what the actual market value cost of doing that rectification work was.
It's a little bit of look over here, don't look over here.
Shake my hand.
Trust me.
Count my fingers.
I'm a nice guy.
Exactly. Exactly.
You're not paying me though. The seller is.
The seller is, exactly. So you just got to always take it with a pinch of salt. And of course, the agent is working for the seller, as we know, and as we always talk about at the Get Buy Ready chat here. So I think that is a good version of it because that happens all the time. And it could be the tap's broken or there's a little water leak here that's been rectified, but the water leak hasn't been rectified. It's just that they've painted over the top of it or whatever it might be. So there's lots of little things like that you need to dig into it further. And if you really want to have that fight about what things are worth, as I say, get all the research done so you know what the problems are. Speak to specialists if you need to understand what it's going to cost to rectify and do those works, but really understand the timeline and whether or not these things actually need to be done or if they're just nice to have done, like the rear fence example that I said, because an owner's not going to renovate the house for you. They're not going to reduce the full cost of those works because if they have to pay for them, they might as well do it themselves and then remarket the home at a higher price.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me. Well, next on the list, we've got 3 ways to approach negotiations around rectifying. Well, that's a good point, actually. So there's, in my mind, there's definitely you walk away or you accept it. What's the third?
The third is more of a middle ground, really, is that you accept that it's not going to get done by the owner, for example, but you negotiate the price to cover the cost of those works or the majority of the cost of those works or an amount at least that you're comfortable to proceed with. So in that example, let's say some rear fencing needs fixing. There's some, an old water leak that needs repairing on a gutter and some paint that needs to be done. The work might come to $12,000. Well, you might agree, a $10,000, $12,000 or $6,000 or $8,000 discount off the price, whatever that might be, and get the work done yourself. Because the problem is, if you take on the responsibility yourself, then you're taking it on warts and all. So it could be, and it almost always is, more expensive than you think. Yeah,
exactly. I 100% agree with that one.
Yeah, so you start with, the water heater's not working. You think, okay, well, I've got a quote here. It says it's going to be $800 or whatever, but then it ends up $1,300 because it's like extra labor, different parts, couldn't get them, had to get emergency parts plus GST and whatever. And it ends up being a lot more expensive than you thought it might have run to. So if you're going to take on the works, that's option one. Then you've really got to know and be prepared for things going above and beyond what you estimate them to be. If you're going to get the seller to do the rectification works, the problem that I've seen over the years as an agent in the middle of that transaction is that owners are never going to do it as good as you.
No, they do a half-assed job.
Half-assed job. Yep. They just want to do the fastest job to get it done to tick that box. Okay. So don't expect it to always be done to the highest quality. But the other hidden problem that so many conveyancers or solicitors missed when I was an agent is if they do specific work, and it might be waterproofing in a bathroom or a roof repair or something that's almost an insurance job, a lot of the tradespeople won't warrant their work to give you a warranty because they did it in the previous owner's name. And it's a way for the tradie to wheeze out of any future problems that happen with the repair that they did. And a lot of solicitors and conveyancers miss that point, and then you're not covered. So, you might get the work done and it might be finished today, but if there's a problem in a month or there's a problem in a couple of months' time or whatever it might be, then you've got no recourse. And this happened to my parents-in-law in Mermaid Waters here. It wasn't through a transaction in terms of buying a property, but they recently had storm damage to their roof. They had it fixed. They paid for it. They had 3 separate times they had to get the same people back because it kept leaking. So they paid for it up front. And then, the next heavy storm, it happened again. Guys came out and said they fixed it. And then a third time it happened. And it got to the point where the company said, do you know what? We can't fix this and we're refunding you the money.
So how would you structure that in the agreement? Would you put it forward in your contract of conditions to say that it has to be liable under my name as well?
Yeah, I think that's the only thing you can do is make sure it's in your legal name and that you've spoken to the company that's potentially doing the works to have that same conversation and you get that in writing from them. You just want to tick those boxes to make sure you're covered and, you're not left exposed later on. So I think you've got to make a decision. Is it option one? You take on all that responsibility yourself. Option 2, you get the owner to do it. And we've just spoken about the pitfalls of that potentially. But the only benefit while we're on that one that could be something that's really relevant to especially first home buyers and investors is if you get the owner to do the works, or even the reverse of it if you're doing it yourself, who's paying for that? Because if you have saved up your deposit, like most first home buyers or investors, there's not a lot of cash left over. So if you've drawn out all your funds for stamp duty, legals, and a deposit, who's going to pay for the $20,000 worth of works that are going to do, they're going to be required when you take possession of the home. So if you do option 1 and take it on yourself, you may not have the cash. If you do option 2, then maybe you can fund your way into it by getting the owner to pay for it. Yeah. So there's kind of an option you got to think about in terms of your cash flow. And then option 3, it probably fits into that same sort of category is can you afford to pay it? And if so, can you negotiate that saving off the purchase price? But remember, if you take 20 grand off the purchase price, that's, $4,000 off your deposit funds for 20%.
True.
Yeah. So you just got to make sure you've got the cash flow to balance that as well.
Or there's Afterpay, if you want to.
Or Afterpay.
Some really good points. And I think I didn't know that one, especially with the owners doing the work and not the trades not qualifying that into the future, which is massive, because if you've done any trade work before, or people have come in and done their work, it's quite often that they get called back in to reassess what they've done due to leaks are a massive issue that I've dealt with in the past. So. Yeah,
it's a big one with property management that we have to deal with all the time, isn't it?
Yeah. But that always goes to what I say, is you don't know what you don't know, and that's why we're here, essentially.
Yep. Well, I think we should finish with the last couple of points that we'd written down, really, which is which option you potentially take in that situation. As a buyer, a lot of inexperienced buyers, a lot of first home buyers, or people that haven't done this lots of times, and even people that possibly haven't done this for 10 years.
What's the majority? They don't transact this way.
Yeah, it's not fresh in their mind. So I would see them either panic and then withdraw because they see these,
disclaimers and fear.
And these potential cost outlays, and they're like, do you know what? This is just too much for me. We're sort of panicking here and we're backtracking, and they don't dig into the reasons why. We've seen this with buyers here at Hello House, where they'll look at a building and pest report and then just crash the deal.
Yep.
We're like, okay, hang on. You're buying a 30-year-old house. Of course it's going to have some issues. Let's work through those one by one and get a really legitimate idea of what it's going to cost to rectify these works. The other one we had recently, we bought a property in Brisbane for a client, and he wanted to add air conditioning and ceiling fans into all the rooms, which is totally fine. It was a 30-year-old house or something and needed the addition to do it. Now, he was penalizing the price to determine his target price, $50,000 for the work to be done. But I said to him, well, it's probably going to cost substantially lower than that. So what else are you factoring in? He goes, oh, no, that's what I thought it would cost. And I'm like, okay, well, let's get quotes from air conditioning companies, which you did. You went along and got ducted air,
split cycle air, and all ceiling fans.
Yeah, exactly. And then we were able to actually give them a real number and say, hang on, it's not 50,000. It's more like 10 or 12,000 or whatever the number finally ended up being. And the problem was, if he was hanging his hat on 50,000, he's very likely going to lose the property to another buyer because he's associating a cost to that rectification, which just isn't relevant.
No.
So no owner's going to buy into that as well if you try and hang your hat on that. So that panic and withdraw or that overcompensating is really dangerous. And then the second one that I saw a lot as an agent was inexperienced buyers would just commit to the home because they're just, head over heels in love with it and frustrated about missing out on properties. And they just want to rush to the finish line. So they look at the building and pest. They have, they're looking at it through rose-colored glasses thinking, oh, it needs completely painting. Oh, we can do that on Saturday. And, oh, aren't the gutters cute? There's a giant hole there and there's a possum inside. And
the restumping too can lead to structural issues as well with the house moving.
Yeah, there's just tons of things that people don't quite put enough emphasis on and maybe buy a dud property because they've run out of time or they've run out of energy and they're emotionally invested.
Yeah, energy at the end. We've all been there. It's can be pretty full on for someone who hasn't done it before, but for us doing it every day,
yeah, totally.
It's just like riding a bike.
Exactly, and that's why you need to outsource this stuff to an expert, we think, so you don't make any of these mistakes and buy what we call, a dud asset. You buy the right property at the right price, and you get all of these elements covered. So you enter into a contract knowing the condition of the home that you're going to buy, or knowing exactly what you've got to do to get it up to the standard that you require to live in or keep as a long-term investment.
Yeah, and the best place to start is the Get Buy Ready course that we've developed, and it obviously goes through find, analyze, negotiate, transact, and there's a lot of nuggets of gold in there that, you just got to listen or read. There's the option of seeing Scott and the video.
It's a good option.
And also downloadable PDFs. Like, it's there to help you. So make those smarter decisions and reach out to us for any questions, because that's what we're here for. Here to help.
Nice one. All right, guys. So we'll see you next week on the Get Buy Ready show. Thanks for tuning in today. See you later.